Okay, my name is Cliff. Hello. I'm the CEO of Speechify. Before I start the talk, I'm just going to raise the energy in the room for 1 second. Cool. I'm glad that you guys are here. Now that we're at a higher energy level, let's get started. So my goal today is to make sure that the information in this talk today will at some point radically alter the trajectory of your life and make your life significantly better because of the information that you learned by walking into this room. So we're going to talk about how to make decisions, which is one of the most useful things that exists in the world. It's the best tool possible. It's one of the highest leveraged levers that you can use. Grab a seat anyway. The talk I gave before this today was about entrepreneurship, how to elevate economic resources from an area of low yield to an area of high yield, effectively how to create value in the world. Making decisions is the art and the science of how, given a specific circumstance that has specific attributes, how to navigate that system to get the outcome that you want. The thing that will make you the most happy, your friends the most happy, your loved one the most happy, the thing that will allow you to create value in the world and result in a better life overall. And I want to start with a quote by Machiavelli. Develop the strength to do bold things, not to endure suffering. And so there's a couple of concepts that I'm going to hit on today, and I'll summarize at the end as well. And those are that the more perfect your information, the better your decision making. Feel free to take a seat anywhere, on the floor if you need to. The second one is when you are considering option A and option B, and you need to choose between the two, there's always option C and option D that are always accessible, but take much more work and effort and more luck to achieve. And the third one is that you should always be open-minded about updating your assumptions. And I'll tie all these things back in the end. And what I'm going to try to do is present this in the form of stories, because that's how I learn best, about difficult decisions that I had to make in my life and what were the tools that allowed me to make those decisions effectively. So the first one is the following. So I now run a company called Speechify. I founded it after Brown. But I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. And I had a problem, which is I am the eldest of 5 kids. We moved to the United States when I was a freshman in high school, so we didn't have a lot of money. So I had about $80,000 in loans to pay back to Brown. And all my friends are getting jobs at Google and Apple and Facebook and consulting companies and investment banks. And I'd interned at a tech company as a product manager, which is what I thought would be the job that I could do and would be the most happy in out of all the options that I gave before. And I realized that I hated it. And the thing is that I am usually an vibrantly happy person, and I just wasn't this summer. And it wasn't that the company was bad. They had really smart people. They had all the perks that you could want, like carrot juice on tap. I ended up being able to lead an organization of people and a team by the time that I finished my internship. And I actually succeeded in making revenue for the company before I left. But every time I wanted to do something, I got blocked. I'd come up with an idea and be like, oh, we don't have the resources, we don't want to do that. And what I needed to do is kind of find ways of getting around the person who was my manager to try and achieve the thing that I wanted, and recruiting other engineers from the company to convince their managers to come help me build the things that I wanted. And I knew that if I built my own thing, it would go much faster. But I couldn't do that because I needed to pay back loans. And I needed to somehow support myself, and whatever I worked on full time, I wouldn't be making enough money to do that immediately. I built about 40 products while I was a student at Brown. But I thought about it, and I realized that none of those things would create enough value in the world to justify me spending all my time on them. Come on in. And so the first decision that I made was first decision is I'm not going to work on any of the projects that I've worked on so far. So I built everything from skateboard brakes to biotech supplements to websites and apps and discount programs and a payment company, et cetera. And none of them excited me enough, and I kept switching between one to the other, and I couldn't pick the one thing that I wanted to work on, that I wanted to dedicate my life to. And so the question is, how do I figure out that problem? And I realized that there were 3 things that were most useful for doing that. The first one is having a lot of experiences. So actually working on all these projects helped me figure out what gave me energy to work on and what was satisfying to me and what I was good at. So that was actually a very good thing that I did. The second thing is reading a lot of books. When you read books, you put all this information into your brain. And it's like doing an exercise, a simulation, where you're living someone else's life, especially if you're reading a biography, for 40 hours that represent their 80-year life. And that helped me figure out a lot of options that I had that I didn't realize before. I'm sure if some of you, your parents are doctors, it's likely that you maybe considered being a doctor. Or if your dad is a lawyer, you might consider being a lawyer. If your mom is a high school principal, you'd consider being a teacher. But I only had 2 parents. And so I read biographies about people who did everything else. And every time I met one of my parents' friends, or a person who came to speak at my school, I would ask them an insane amount of questions, and they'd think that I was annoying, and I'd get their email, and I'd follow up, and I'd get them to meet with me more, and I'd suck the marrow out of them when it comes to the knowledge that I could pull. And so when I came to Brown initially, as a freshman, I thought I either wanted to do investment banking or be an entrepreneur. And so my plan was, I thought that renewable energy would create the most value in the world in the next 50 years. So I wanted to do an independent concentration in renewable energy engineering and a Bachelor of Arts in economics. So that's what I wrote to my counselor that I wanted to do when I started school. And I quickly realized that engineering classes are very difficult, but they excite me because it's something that I would not learn by myself. So I optimized taking classes that I knew I wouldn't pick up the information from by myself. And that I was naturally good at economics. So those were easy classes to get A's in, but they were kind of a waste of my time because I would learn this information by myself reading books anyway. So I decided to drop economics. And instead, I dedicated that time to taking more natural sciences classes that I couldn't learn the material on by myself, and computer science classes, which I was usually in the bottom of the class of. And so there's a principle, which is always go upwind. If you have a boat or sailing, you are sailing, if you don't know where to go upwind, because that'll give you the opportunity to take advantage of the wind when you do know what direction you want to go. So go and do hard things that will open up more options to you. But don't be lazy when it comes time to make a choice and take the easy way out. Take the time and figure out the decision-making that you need to make. So I came into Brown with a plan, but I was very open-minded to changing it. So I didn't major in economics. I did renewable energy, but I didn't do it as a Bachelor of Science. I ended up doing it as a Bachelor of Arts. And part of the reason was that I applied 5 times to get it approved as an independent concentration, and every time it was rejected. So eventually what I did is I switched advisors to someone who would bat for me much more. And eventually he called the committee and was like, "Hi, my name is Domenico Pacifici. I have 2 PhDs in electrical engineering. Cliff's major is legit. Please approve it." And they finally did. But they did it like in my last semester at Brown, so I was cutting it very close. I figured if it didn't work, I'd quickly try to finish the economics degree. And then I went to all these meetings with investment bank companies and consulting companies, and I asked them questions that I actually cared about the answers for. Are you working? Do you get energy from what you're doing? Why do you do your job? What's the best thing about your job? Well, the compensation is really good. OK. I see. Are you working with the smartest people you've ever met? People are smart. OK. And Goldman Sachs put me up in a hotel and had me at an event that they did for diversity because I'm dyslexic. And I quickly realized that this is just not the environment for me. And I got way more energy by creating value in the world. And so that's a weird term, creating value. There's another one that I use a lot called agency, personal agency. And so where did I pick up these terms? Well, one is from reading all these books and all these biographies and philosophy, et cetera. But the other is from specific classes that I took at Brown. So the most useful classes that I took at Brown, aside from CS 32, I took a grand total of 3 CS classes at Brown, is philosophy classes. Philosophy of the meaning of life. Philosophy of life and money. Classics of political economy. Money and Power with Mark Blyth. And so I would just read everything in these classes. Most people don't, but I had this cool tool called Speechify that let me easily do that. Download Speechify. And so I would read them with text-to-speech. And one of my favorite essays that I read is this essay by this guy called Emerson. Come on in. By this guy called Emerson. And in the bottom of this essay, the essay is called On Wealth. He talks about creating value. He talks about how there's this idea where man is able to apply his thought to matter and rearrange atoms in a certain way that results in more resources than there were initially. For example, Thomas Savery, who started the steam engine, just thought up of this idea. And he took a bunch of metal scraps on the bottom of his workshop, rearranged them in a certain way, and now they're able to help you take water from the ground and put it at the top. And if you put them on a train, they let it move, and it can create electricity. And then you take that one invention, you multiply it times 100, 1,000, 1 billion times, and it's why our society thrives so much more today than it did in the past. So to me, that felt like magic. And I kind of had that feeling, but by going and talking to people and reading books and trying different things, I figured out the stuff that gave me the most energy. And then by reading philosophy, I was able to apply a word to this feeling. And somewhere else, I don't remember where. I think it was actually in a conversation with a friend. Either they or I used the term personal agency to describe the ability that you have to control your life and change the world around you, even when things are difficult. And that became something else that I was very, very passionate about, and that I sought to help activate and awaken in other people, is the idea, the realization that you can change the world around you, and there's no actually rules, right? In any human-ran system, there's a way of circumnavigating an obstacle. It just requires you to go and find the person at the top of the governance structure and convince them to give you a special exception. So when I was graduating Brown, I didn't know what I wanted to work on, and I realized what I cared about was creating real value in the world. So I developed a thesis around what I wanted to work on, and the thesis was as follows. I wanted to build a simple app or website, and that was based on companies like Airbnb or Uber that I saw getting successful, but they weren't very complicated. The idea was just novel, that had a clever business model, that did not make money off of ads, because I realized that was not something that gave me energy, that created real value in the world, because that was something that I actually genuinely cared about, and I realized that when I worked on those things, I got the most energy, and that I personally would want to work on for the next 10 years plus. And I had trouble figuring out what that thing would be. And I didn't know what it was when I was graduating, and there were 3 projects that I was working on, but none of them fit the category well enough. And instead of taking a job and I had pressure to take a job at a tech company or an investment bank or consulting company. And I have 2 of the most supporting parents that anybody could ever wish for. But I remember a car ride with my mom. We were talking about it. This is like my junior year, winter break. And she was genuinely scared for me. She was like, Cliff. And like, I later had a conversation with her, and she teared up about this, because like, it's very, very risky to like not take a job when you graduate college, when you have loans and like all this stuff. And she didn't want me to be in that situation. And so I started applying to jobs. And there was this existential moment that I had where I was crashing on a friend's couch at Stanford. And I had my computer open, and I was applying to this job at Google. And I felt how I didn't want this job. And I had this moment where I kind of like stepped out of my body, turned to myself, and slapped myself in the face. And I was like, what are you doing? This is not what you want. Don't take a shortcut to the thing that you don't want. Try your hardest to do the thing that you want, and then if you fail, go do the thing that you don't want. So there's this great book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I'm currently reading it for the 6th time. And one of his ideas is to flesh out in detail what happens if you fail. So let's say you have a job and you quit your job. What's the worst that can happen? Well, you quit your job, you stop having income. You suddenly can't pay for rent. You can't pay for food. You don't have health insurance. Like, you're going to be homeless. Will I really be homeless? Not really. I could always go crash with my parents. That wouldn't be really fun, but I could. And people, like my friends, will think I'm a loser, but they know me, they like me, they probably, whatever. Screw them. And even if I couldn't stay with my parents, it actually is true that I do have great friends, and they would each let me crash on their couch for like a week to a month. Even now, while I do have an apartment, I actively crash on other people's couches like very frequently. I usually come and visit Brown like almost once a month, even though I live in California, because I get so much energy when I'm here, and every time I crash with someone else. So I could have a place to stay, and if I like burnt out all my income, like what job would I get? Well, I could teach myself more iPhone app development and get a job as an engineer relatively easily. Worst comes to worst, I can go and like stand on the sidewalk and like do backflips and break dance, and people will like give me money, and that's how I could pay for food. But I could solve this problem for myself. It's not the end of the world. So I might as well go full force in the thing that I care about, and if I fail, I'll mitigate the risk later. So what was important here is that I had a more accurate sense of truth than most people do, because people are very, very afraid of not having a job. My mom was very, very afraid of me not having a job. Now, I've realized over time that when my dad or my mom very strongly suggests something, always, if I don't take their advice, I regret it like a year later. And so I have a principle, which is if my dad suggests something, take his advice unless I very strongly disagree with him. If I'm like neutral, go with what my dad thinks. This was not somewhere where I was neutral. This was somewhere where I had a strong opinion that I wanted to work on this thing. And so I went with my own idea. And another really important concept is building your own table of values. Don't take your values from society or the pulpit or your parents or your friends. Create them for yourself. And this is something that if you read Nietzsche or Aristotle, they're really big on. So this is a value that was very important to me, creating value and doing so independently, and working on the thing that gave me energy and made me happy. But I didn't know what to work on, and I had all these loans. So when in real life, you have between option A, work at Google, and option B, work at a consulting company or Goldman Sachs. There's always option C and D that require much more work and require more luck, but they're always accessible. And most people usually don't attempt to get to them because they think that the amount of luck and hard work that is required to get to them make them out of range, but they don't make them out of range. They're still in range. And if you apply the framework or within any human-ran system, you can always get a special exception. You can get there. So I was like, cool. I got $80,000 worth of loans. I really want to do this thing. How do I make it happen? So I had this internship with this tech company. They were paying me like $30 an hour, maybe a little bit less than that. And I was like, OK, so I want to do this. And I started freelancing on this website called Upwork. I could do additional work so I could make a little bit more money. And I started applying to scholarships. And I looked at it and I realized, OK, I was not a US citizen back then. And so I had a limit to what scholarships I was eligible for. But I found out that if I applied to something that was very specific to me, let's say a scholarship for someone who is an entrepreneur, studying energy, is dyslexic and Jewish, I'd have a high probability of winning. So I scoured all the internet and all the databases for the best scholarships possible. And I realized that I was spending more time looking for scholarships than actually writing essays for scholarships. So what I ended up doing is hiring 10 freelancers in the Philippines to find and apply to scholarships for me full time. And I paid them double the local salary, which is $1.50. So I paid them $3 an hour. So for every hour that I worked, I could employ them for 10 hours. And every day, I would work at my job, freelance, go on a run, and between midnight and 3 in the morning, I would apply to scholarship and manage this process. And I ended up, my return on my investment was like 5,300% in like 3 months. So I ended up being able to pay for most of my loans for Brown that way. And then a horrible thing happened. I was at Facebook doing visiting. And earlier that day, I'd open up the financial aid website at Brown. And I got a certain amount of financial aid from Brown, just not enough. And I now had all these scholarships that I got from outside. And suddenly I saw that my financial aid from Brown increased, equaling to the amount of the outside loans, scholarships that I got. Because Brown is supposed to meet your demonstrated need. It didn't actually meet my demonstrated need. So they reduced the amount. And so I worked so hard. And so I actually went into the bathroom and cried because it was going to crush my dreams and all the things that I wanted to be able to do. And now I couldn't do them. So now I'm back to option A and option B. Am I going to work at Facebook or am I going to work at McKinsey? And I was like, no, screw this. I want to do the thing that I want. So I went to try and find a solution. I talked to every person who had power at Brown to try and get it done. I talked to my admission officer. I talked to the people in the financial aid office. I talked to the president of Brown. And none of them would help me. None of them, they're nice people, but they just work within the system. It just didn't work. I just didn't stop. I just kept trying and trying and trying until I finally got it to work. If you communicate clearly to the world what you want and what you need, and you do it genuinely, people will help you. It's how the world works. It's how people work. At least that's my opinion. And the way in which my model of the universe works. So that brings me to my second point, which is every person has a model of the universe in their brain. And they operate using that model. Another way of looking at it is what I call the tree of truth. If you look at knowledge, the way in which knowledge is built is you start from the ground up with a base of this tree. And then you build branches, then you build leaves. And if you are exposed to a leaf of knowledge over here, but you don't have a branch there, it'll whittle away, and you won't keep it. This is why rereading books is often very useful, because if you read a bunch of other books and you read it again, you'll encounter this word, lubrication, that you didn't know before. And suddenly you notice people are using the word lubrication 4 times a week. What is this? It's a conspiracy. And I'm sure that most of you have had this experience happen to you. But it's just because you learned it, and this time you had a branch for it to fall on. The way in which you can look at Google Maps. 5 years ago, if you zoomed in with Google Maps to a place, it would be really pixelated. But now it's not. You got all this data and these rows. And if you go into a shop, you'll even see the photos. And so if you're using that type of Google Map and that type of tree, you'll make better decisions than if you're using pixelated Google Maps. And so another thing that's important to consider is when you're building this mental model of the universe, you want to use what I dub the .svg version, not the .jpeg version. So if you look at file storage for photos, .jpeg basically is a grid of pixels, and it remembers the location of each pixel. But a .svg is a mathematical equation that represents the image. And so even if you expand it large, it'll still retain the quality that it has. So don't make your decisions about life and your learning based on memorization. Do it based on understanding. And then once you build a principle, you're going to extrapolate it to anything else. And so, for example, when I'm reading books about the life of Alexander Hamilton, and I see how he navigated his way by convincing, when he was like 20 years old, all these old people who were running the government to make amendments to the Constitution, I look at the principles. I don't just memorize the date and what he did. How did he do it? And then it's cool, because when I'm 20 years old and I'm trying to convince like an old white guy who runs a VC firm to give me money, like I can use the same tactics that Hamilton used, and Benjamin Franklin used, and Elon Musk used, and Steve Jobs used. And when I'm trying to convince scholarship people to kind of go around the rules for me, I can use the same strategies that Benjamin Franklin developed. So develop that tree. And the best way to kind of hone that tree and hone the mental model is to have different extreme experiences to edit how you see the world, to read a lot of books so you can pattern match with other people's lives, and to talk with friends and other people and learn about their lives. So if I go to the Ratty, I talk to the person behind the counter, right? Like, I haven't attended Brown for 2 years. Yesterday, I got a spicy with, and Vinny taps me on my shoulder. He's like, Cliff, good to see you. I was like, good, Vinny, how's it going? And so we talked about politics, because last time we talked, Bernie Sanders was running for office, and he really loved Bernie Sanders. And I told him you should check out Andrew Yang, who went to Brown and is running for president. You should check him out. And I talked to people on the subway, and I talked to my bus driver and anything, because I want to understand their lives. And one of the important things that I've learned is that every person is awesome. You just have to ask the questions to figure out in which way they are awesome. And that's how I pull information and flesh out my tree. So by living life this way, I learned over time that if I ask people for help, they'll help me. And if I'll smile at someone, they'll smile back. And so I have this thesis, and that's how my mental model of the universe is built. Now, it might be that yours is built differently. And so you don't think that people will help you. And so the more experiences you have, the better your model is. And so for me, I had developed this model that allowed me to think that I can take risks. And every time that I tried something difficult, it worked. And so that reinforced the idea and made me take all these hard steps. And what did I do before that made me believe that I could do this? Well, when I was in first grade, I couldn't figure out how to read. And then second grade, I couldn't figure it out either. In third grade, I couldn't figure it out either. And I was like at the bottom of my class. I got like C's and D's and everything. And I decided that when I was in preschool, I wanted to be Prime Minister of Israel, a billionaire, and a pop star. And two of those things you can't be if you can't read. So I decided I'm going to figure out how to read. And I'd go to the library every day, and I'd fall asleep in the book because it didn't work out. But I really tried hard, and it didn't work. I tried and tried, it just didn't work. And I wanted to read Harry Potter really badly. And so my dad took pity on me. And every night, he'd come back home early, even though usually he wasn't there for dinner because he was working hard. But he'd make an exception for this. And he'd sit with me on my bed, and he'd read Harry Potter to me. And I loved it so much that he recorded himself. And when he couldn't make it home, I would re-listen to those books of Harry Potter. And then I found the audiobook for Harry Potter. Actually, he found the audiobook for Harry Potter. And I started listening to Harry Potter, to the whole series. And I listened to the first book 22 times in a row. And at the time, I was in Israel. I didn't speak English, but I listened to the book in English, even though I didn't know English. I just really wanted to listen. And actually learned English from Harry Potter audiobooks when I was 12. So I still have the first chapter of Harry Potter memorized. And then from there, I started listening to all these other books. And aside from my parents, the thing that influenced me the most in life is being able to listen to books in this way and reading like 100 books a year. And it's, as a result of that, my tree of knowledge got built out really big. And I had like teachers who like didn't want to let me into their like BC calculus class because they thought I couldn't keep up and I'd mess up the records. And I was like, no, screw you. This just happened to my little brother, and so I'm coaching him on how to like negotiate with his teachers to let him do it. And so I have this unfair advantage, which is from a very young age, I had to figure out how to work systems to allow me to do the things that I wanted, even though the initial path was broken. So even when I tried to learn how to code, and when you code, if you misspell a variable here and then try to do it again here differently, the program won't run. And so you'll run into a lot of bugs, and you'll have a lot of brick walls that you're running into. And so you get really good at running at that wall and like smashing into it and crumpling to the floor and then picking yourself up and doing it again and again and again until you get it. And so I got really good at that, and that was built into my model of the universe. And so I developed this perseverance whenever I did. So how do I stay at Brown, and how do I not take a job, and how do I not like become homeless? So what I did was I, again, went to every person at Brown who had power, and I was like, hey, I want to stay. Can you help me stay? And the president of Brown didn't help me get additional extended financial aid, and like financial aid didn't work. And I talked to everybody. Two of my professors said, you know what? You actually come and guest teach my class often, and like you mentor a lot of students. Whatever you need, I'll help you. So I found out that in Brown's like records, there's this thing called a visiting scholar. which is designed for like people from like Germany and Europe who come to study here. And I was like, I could be a visiting scholar. So, and you don't need approval from anyone but a professor who sponsors you. So I convinced both of them to sponsor me as a visiting scholar, which gives me a student ID and a student email. And then after getting told 9 times, I convinced the meal plan to let me stay on meal plan. And I got an apartment basically on campus, living with a bunch of varsity athletes who were seniors, and I had just graduated. And so I effectively was on campus. So I got to stay at Brown for an additional year for effectively free. And what I did that summer is I did not enjoy software engineering or being a product manager. And so I found a program that let me teach computer science, and I love teaching. And that paid me enough to support myself to pay for rent, food, and miscellaneous costs for a year. And I said, you know what? And I decided that I would not pay any of my loans for the first year, defer payment. And if I couldn't figure this out, I'd do it again and again. And I'd continue applying to scholarships so I could get rid of all my loans. And at this point, I did it for most of them. And I kind of developed this infinite runway for myself, where I could just continue working on projects. And if it failed, I'll go teach again and then do it again during the year. The only problem is I had to swallow my pride and not tell everybody that I got a job at a nice company. I'm actually staying here. I'm not even doing a master's. I'm just like chilling. And so that's what I did. And I just worked on a ton more projects. And I developed this thesis for what I wanted to work on that I mentioned before that led me to working on Speechify. And the thesis was simple app or website, creates real value in the world, not off of ads, something I really care about. And I built like another 15 different things. And eventually I read this paper about the application of deep learning to text-to-speech that made it so that for the first time in history, you could do text-to-speech at the quality of human speech. So I implemented that into this product that I built. It started doing really great. Amazing. The most important decision that I made in my entire history so far, one of them, other than coming to Brown, is that I decided to take a step back in this like job process, take a breath, and decide on doing the thing that I was really excited about and figuring out how I could get to option C and option D, even though the only options in front of me were option A and option B. So I'm going to give you 2 more stories that give examples of how to do that in real life so that it doesn't seem out of hand. This summer, I had to get a house to fit like 8 people on our team on because we wanted to live in Palo Alto, right across the street from Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. And I could not find a house in Palo Alto that would let us rent for 3 months. And I had an experience before where I rented an office where I tried to cancel, and they like slammed me with a big cancellation policy. And succeeded in negotiating $5,000 off of that, which was great. But that only happened like a month ago. It was like over my head for a while. So I was like, OK, I'm not going to commit to a place for 12 months. I'm going to do it for 3 months. But no one said yes. And so I went all over Craigslist and all over Trulia and contacted everybody in my network to try and find this house. I talked to a lot of realtors and like brokers, and no one could help me. So eventually, I just got an Airbnb in Palo Alto, moved the entire team there, and they were working on the product, and I was trying to find us a place to stay. And we finished the first week of the first Airbnb, it didn't work. Second week of the second Airbnb, didn't work. And I'm just trying. And I'm working off of this idea that I know that if I try hard enough, I'll figure it out. And so eventually, it's like a Friday night. I'm like really mad at smiling. I'm really, really trying to figure this out. And Matt, who works with us, goes, Cliff, we got to find a house. And I'm like, yes. And so it's 12:30 p.m., like after midnight on a Friday, and I'm calling realtors. And someone picks up. And I'm like, hi, I'm Cliff, blah, blah, blah. I see you have this house listed. I want to rent it for 3 months. She's like, no one rents for 3 months in Palo Alto. We want it for the full year. And I'm like, OK, do you have anything else that's like maybe off the market or like unfurnished or like something like that? And she's like, well, we might have this one place. OK, great. I'd love to come see it. So we go and we see it, and then we see the first house, and we talk about it. And I was like, this is great. I'm ready to rent this house right now. I'll give you the full 3 months ahead of time. I know that this house has been on the market for 6 months, unrented. Let's just do it right now. She's like, no, we can't. And I'm like, can you like make a special exception? And she's like, no, not really. And I was like, can I talk to the owner? She's like, no, not really. I was like, please, can I talk to the owner? She's like, well, I don't have their number. It's like, oh, where's their number? It's like, in my office. Great, let's go to your office. Well, my office doesn't have Wi-Fi, so I won't be able to pull it up in my email. No problem. I'll tell her from my phone. We can put up your email. And so finally, she's like, OK, let me see if you could talk to my boss. And I'm like, great. So we call her boss. We tell the boss what is going on. And she's like, no, absolutely not. He can't rent this place for 3 months. And I try to make my case. And she's like, no, hangs up. So I stay there. I make friends. And I talk to this realtor. And finally, her boss calls back. She's like, you know what? If he wants to talk to the owner so badly, we'll let him talk to the owner. So she calls the owner. She had the number the entire time. She's like, hi. I'm standing here with this guy. He's really determined. He's willing to pay everything up front, blah, blah, blah. And she like walks to the other side of the car so that I'm not like interrupting. She's like talking, and I can hear that she's not making a good enough argument. So I walk around to the side of the car too. And I start to talk much louder so the person on the phone can hear me. And they finally go, put him on the line. And I convinced him to rent me the house for 3 months. And so then we were able to move in. Same exact situation as the thing with the scholarships. Same exact situations as the thing with staying at Brown. Same exact situation with like the 3 classes at Brown that I got a B in and convinced the professor to give me an A because I felt I earned an A. So I just emailed them and talked to them until I got it. If you persevere, you'll get whatever you want. You just got to do it with a smile, and you got to be polite. Final example. When I was a freshman, somebody stole my backpack from Fonts. And again, didn't have a lot of money, and my laptop was in that backpack. And it was an Apple laptop. And if I missed this, like, I'd be stuck with an HP for the rest of my time at Brown. And not okay. I thought somebody must have maybe I forgot it in the radio or on the grass. It wasn't there. So I called DPS. They came. They were useless. And I said, but there's a security camera right over there. Can we access that footage? And they're like, no. I was like, well, who can access that footage? We don't know. And then I forced them to figure it out. Apparently, only detectives can access that footage. And then they left. So I went down to the police station, and I tried to convince detectives to come talk to me. And they're like, no, detective can't come talk to you. So I sat there for 4 hours making friends with the guy behind the glass, trying to convince him to have a detective come out. Finally, a detective comes out. He's like, sorry, kid, you can't watch the video. Even Providence police can't watch it for 9 days. I'm like, OK, can you go watch it and tell me what you see? It's like, fine. So he goes to get in his car. I get in his car, too. And he's like, you can't come in the room to watch this. It's not allowed. I was like, OK, no problem. We walk in. I walk into the room anyway. He doesn't stop me, because at this point, we become buds. We pull up the footage, and we see this guy come up, blue cap, blue hoodie, gray jacket, look around, take my backpack, and run off. It's like this 6-foot-tall white guy, clearly not a Brown student. Looks like he does drugs. I'm like, holy cow, somebody actually stole my laptop. And what I did is I pulled out my phone, and I took a video of the screen while this happened, and then put it back in my phone. And I started messaging all my friends, hey, this guy stole my laptop. If you see him, let me know ASAP. And we became friends with the detective during this time. And he's like, I can't show you any more of this footage, but we have a picture of him from another angle. Somebody just let me know. It's on my phone, but I'm not allowed to show it to you. I'm going to go to the bathroom. So I take his phone. I text myself the image. I send it to all my friends. And he's like, OK. And then I said, find my iPhone on his phone, so you could find my laptop if it's connected to the internet. And he's like, all right, kid, go back to your dorm in Emory, live your life normally, we'll let you know if anything happens. And I can tell he's not going to do anything. I'm like, OK. So I grill him on the history of crime at Brown. How often this happened? Where's it happened? Like, how often they get it back? They never get it back. Notice, the more perfect your information, the better your decision-making can be. So I'm getting more information here, and I ask questions as one of my main tools in order to make decisions. And my decision was I'm going to continue until I figure this thing out. Right? This happened freshman year. Can you see how this experience freshman year happened because of my dyslexia before? And because of this experience freshman year, oh, you don't even know the end of the story. You'll learn it later. I ended up applying to scholarships and staying at Brown and getting this house and all this stuff. Anyway, I'm like, well, if I was this guy, what would I do? Maybe I'd go to the Apple store and try to have them change the password so I could log in or replace the hard drive. He's like, nah, we talked to Apple. They never help us. They tell us we're not in the security business. I'm like, OK. If I go there and I persevere much more than normal Brown detectives will, maybe they will. This is before there was Uber in Providence. So I convinced the detective to drive me to the Apple store in the mall. And then he leaves. And my idea in my head is there's like a 3% chance I find footage of this guy in an Apple store. But at this point, what do I have to lose? So didn't go to any classes that day, didn't meet up with any friends, and I decided I'm dedicating my life to finding this laptop. And so that's what I did. And as I'm walking to the Apple store, I see this guy out of the corner of my eye charging his cell phone. He has a blue cap and a blue vest and a gray hoodie. I'm like, holy shit, that's the guy. So I go back to the security guard at the entrance of the mall, and I'm like, hey, this guy stole my laptop. He's like, that's a big accusation, kid. Do you have any evidence of this? Hell yeah, I have evidence of this. So I pull up my phone to show him the video. And my phone's out of battery from sending that video to everybody. So he's like, sorry, I can't help you. So I go up to the guy. I'm like, hey, my friends told me you found my laptop. I'm so glad you did this. I wanted to give you a reward and say thank you. He's like, I don't have your laptop. And he gets up. He's like, no, you don't understand. My friends told me you have my laptop. I just wanted to give you a reward and say thank you. He's like, I don't have your laptop, kid. Leave me alone. exits the mall, start running. So I start running after him. And so there's a security guard. Now he sees. So we take like 3 steps. The security guard turns around, goes back to the mall. So now I'm running towards this guy. We're going towards the Providence Amtrak station. And I try to give him the let again. I'm like, hey, my friends told me to find my laptop. I just want to give you a reward and say thank you. He's like, I don't have your laptop, kid. Leave me alone. I was like, I know you have my laptop. Take it out now and put it on the ground. I was like small at this point. I have no idea what this guy has on him, so I'm like 20 feet away. Take it out now and put it on the ground. I was like, I don't have your laptop. I know you have my laptop. Take it out now and put it on the ground. It's like, I don't have your laptop. I know you have my laptop. This is your last chance. I will not follow you. Police will not follow you. It ends here. Put it on the ground now. But if you don't, I will follow you until the ends of the earth until I get it back. I will follow you to Boston. I will follow you to New York. I will follow you to California. I'm getting this back for you. Take out my laptop and put it on the ground now. So he opens his bag, takes out my laptop, and he puts it on the ground. So I pick up my laptop, I hug it to my chest. Give it a little kiss. He's like, now leave me alone, kid. He's like, who the fuck is this crazy kid? Take out my charger and put it on the ground. It's like $80. Where'd you put the rest of my stuff? In the second story bathroom of the mall. So I go to the second story bathroom of the mall. I find my graphing calculator, my notebooks, and my pens in a trash can. And I go to the security guard, and I'm like, hey, man, can you do me a favor? Can you call DPS? I need this detective Bob to come pick me up. Bob comes, picks me up. They talk about how I'm insane. And the thing is, Providence Police is not allowed to show you this footage. So we step into the station, and everybody is so excited. They're like, Bob, how'd you get this kid's laptop back? This has not happened in the last 10 years for Brown DPS. And he goes, you can't tell him he showed me the footage. These Brown kids, they're very smart. This guy, he's got a photographic memory. And so what did I learn in that experience? There was a 3% chance I would actually get my laptop back, but it was worthwhile taking it. And if you look at my life, there's so many instances where I've taken that 3% chance over and over and over and over and over again. And in almost all of them, I failed. But in some of them, I don't. And when I don't, it results in like outlandish results that significantly improve my life. And so that's what I want you guys to pick up from this talk. Is when you make decisions, yes, you should make a pros and cons list. You should pick up all the information that you can. But you should also realize that when presented with option A, go back to Emory, and option B, like trust Bob, you always have option C and option D. They just take way more energy and require way more luck. But you're able to pull it off. You just have to persevere, be nice, smile, and you're going to lose most of the time. But when you win, it's a big, big, big deal. And it allows you to work in your company and do all that. I feel like I should end the talk now because it's such a high note, but I have more to share with you guys. We talked about how to pick where you work. We talked about how I got that house. We talked about how you should do the probabilities in your head when you're trying to decide what to go after. When you're trying to figure out also what you want to do in life and how you want to act, try and find, it's very hard to do, the people you admire and what you admire about them. And the best way of doing that is asking questions, right? Like, I admire Vinny for the fact that though he works at Brown in Joe's, he reads. Do you guys know Gail? Have you noticed that Gail almost always has a book with her and she's reading? Have you guys talked to Gail about the books that she's reading? She works in the radio. She swipes. She's like, hi. Yeah. Like, that's so cool to me. So I admire Gail for reading. And I admire Vinny for like having this like desire to learn. But I also admire Elon Musk for everything that he does with Tesla, SpaceX, etc. Even though people are not very happy with him right now, I still believe. I don't admire Steve Jobs because he's a dick to people. And that I completely reject from my mental model of the universe. It sucks and it doesn't work, and that's not how I want to live my life. But there's aspects of his life that I do admire. Same thing for Alexander Hamilton. And I feel like I know these people like my friends because I've taken 50 hours to learn about their 80-year life. And every minute detail, every turning point, every decision that they made, especially if they wrote their own biography, I understand it. And even if they didn't write a biography, before he ran for president, Obama wrote a book about his ideas about the world, and I read it in 8 hours on double speed, so 4 hours. I did it on a plane coming to Brown. So effectively, I had a 4-hour conversation with Obama when I was sitting on a plane. Pretty cool. So that's how you flesh out your model of the universe. We're going to run out of time soon, and I want to open up to questions. So I'm going to go and do a quick summary of the things that we learned. But I'm also going to share, like, obviously, one of the useful things when you make decisions is to make a pros and cons list. And it's how you figure out how to allocate your time, because often decision-making is predicated on how you spend your time. So for example, I don't drink. And the reason I don't drink is because I did a pros cons list. And I noticed that, like, I know that if I would drink, I'd get hungover and I'd burn some neurons, and I want Sunday morning to, like, build stuff. And I was like, well, what's the benefit of drinking? It'll bring me closer together with people. It'll lower my inhibitions. So before I got to college, I was like, OK, how do I mitigate this risk? And that's one of the most important things when going from option C and option D instead of A and B, is how do you mitigate the risk of losing option A and option B? Because if you do something else, you might lose these chances. So what I did is the 4-hour work week suggests a series of comfort challenges, and I would do all of them. For example, go to a Starbucks and lie down on the ground for 10 seconds. And it's embarrassing. I can feel the tension in the room. But you know what? I don't really care, because I've done this before. And when you're at a party, you want to dance with someone that you don't know, you go and practice and you do that. And as you practice, you get better at this. And it gets you to be, like, bold enough. Again, develop strength to do bold things, not to endure suffering at a job you don't want or in a situation that you don't want. Develop the boldness to ask Bob to drive you to the mall. But make that pros cons list, and then mitigate risk. So for example, with deciding to not have a job, everyone's like, oh my God, like, the recruiting process happens at the end of your time at Brown. Like, you won't be able to get as good of a job. That's bullshit. Talk to any person who's taking a gap year after they study. They usually get better jobs because they learned more about themselves. They have more friends at bigger companies. Like, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy that big organizations want you to think because they want to hire you now. But it's not true. So again, build that model of the universe. Have the actual appropriate tree of truth. A lot of people view the world like this, as if it's like coming onwards. And if there's a wall, you can't pass that wall. What we want to do is develop the practice of looking down at the world and seeing, oh, well, I do parkour. So I could, like, run up the wall and then, like, jog around and, like, not listen to the system and find exceptions wherever I want. So I encourage you to do that. And realize that doing that allows you to, A, manage your fear. B, seek truth. C, mitigate risks, like what I did with the scholarships and what I did with actually having, like, a setup where I would be productive in school because I knew I'd be productive at Brown more than I would be productive at home. So final summary of the concepts that we went over, and then we're going to go into questions. 1, be bold. Don't suffer. 2, handle your fear. Be realistic about what actually happens if you don't achieve the things that you want to achieve. Talk to people, read books, actually write out in hand what happens. Will you actually be homeless? Probably not. Write a list of what you would do if you did end up in that situation. Choose when to be hyper-persevering. You can't do it always because you'll run out of energy. But there's certain situations where the outcome is big enough where it's worthwhile. And if you lose, big deal. You're at the same situation that you were before. You just spent a week trying to do this thing. But if you win, wow. There's always a way, always, to circumnavigate an obstacle in any human ran system. You just have to go to the person at the top of the governance structure and get a special exception. And even when its fate comes to, like, natural sciences in the real world, if you run into a brick wall with your shoulder often enough and forcefully enough, and you build yourself up and you do it again and again and again and again and again, the wall will eventually fall. And if you're smart, you won't try the same tactic every single time. You'll, like, try to go around. You should, like, bring a bazooka, like, do something to, like, get around it. And so, like, iterate in the same way that when I needed to learn how to read, it didn't work for myself, even though I tried really hard. So then I used my dad, and then I used audiobooks. But there's no audiobooks for most things that you learn in school. So I built Speechify. To persevere, flesh out your tree of truth, and develop the most accurate model of the universe that you can so you can make decisions on real facts, not opinions that people give you. So determine your own values. Don't accept them from other people. Develop your own personal principles from these truths that you develop and run your life based on those principles. Understand people's priorities in life and take the time to get to know people and understand what drives them. Ask them questions like, what's your top 3 goals in life? What's your biggest challenge right now? And if you feel awkward asking those questions, great. It's an opportunity to build that ability to feel uncomfortable. But one trick that you could do is ask them, hey, Vinny, can I ask you a personal question? Sure. What do you do in your free time when you're not around? Speak and write. It's two of the best ways of organizing your thoughts in your brain. It's one thing to intake information. It's another thing to have them organized in the .svg format. So for me, it's easy to speak. And during this talk, I learned a lot of things, and I'm going to rewatch it later and figure out what were the ways in which I phrased things. I'll put them in my table of values that way. But also writing is a really effective way of doing that. When you have calls with people or meetings, take notes and highlight the sections that are important. Don't take notes just to capture everything, but use them as a tool for thinking and for negotiating. I like Notion, Google Sheets, and Apple Notes. And make a pros and cons lists when it's useful. Be open to updating your assumptions and your ideas about the world. Find people you admire and figure out why you admire them. And then try to become like them. If you find someone like that, seek them out and try to spend more time with them. Everybody who works for our company reached out to me after reading a Medium post or a YouTube video going to a talk. And they were like, hey, you're cool. I want to learn from you guys. How can I help? And read books. Books are magical. They're the #1 trick for turning yourself into a great person quickly because it lets you live the lives of all the best people that have ever existed. And even if it's fantasy books, imagine that you're the main character and learn from their mistakes and their decisions. It's a good exercise. I hope that was helpful. I'm down for any questions you have.